Yo, this is Sigjir, and sometimes you're given a sign to create a video on a specific subject. To give you a little bit of background, I have recently made some videos dealing with phase, whether that's phase issues or using phase events to sound design like a respace or something like that. And in addition to that, I was giving someone some feedback on a tune and had mentioned that the sides could use some more excitement or some more depth in their mix down, and then they were asking me about various ways to go about doing that. And so that brought me to this idea to film a video discussing some techniques that I use to either create stereo signal or specifically address and, let's say, excite the side channel in your mix, whether this could be done on a specific sound or track, or in the context of this video, we're gonna work on like a bus where we're gonna send everything to this group, and then the track itself plus this group will then go to the master and be the final sound. So let's talk about what stereo is, because we always hear stereo and mono or mid and side frequencies or signals. Mono is pretty simple. It's one audio signal, typically centered. Stereo, which is short for stereophonic sound, is typically achieved by using a minimum of two independent audio signals, typically panned left and right. Left and right. I think that's reversed for the camera. There's one signal pan left, one signal pan right. You can actually do more than that. You can get into quadraphonic sound or surround sound, which I believe surround sound is five independent signals, but I'm not entirely sure about that. I don't really keep up to date on modern surround sound technology, so it might be more. There might be other ways to do that. The question we really want to be asking here is why stereo at all? Why even strive for a stereo sound? Because whenever we hear about making basses or kick sub phase relations, we always hear about how everything has to be a good, crisp, clean mono signal to be safe in a club or on an album or something like that. The short answer is that stereo tends to sound better. Our ears prefer to hear a stereo signal over a mono signal. In actuality, it's a combination of those signals that creates what we actually like. So we're going to strive to keep our low end relatively mono and centered so that the feeling of the sub and the bass is there, and it resonates in your chest cavity. And then with the stereo or the sides, we're going to try to create some more depth so that each ear is hearing the same thing but slightly differently, which is kind of a like a brain scratcher. If you could only take one thing away from this video, I want you to take away one key concept. The goal when we are trying to create depth in the stereo field and have exciting side signals is we want to create subtle differences between the left and right signals. And we're going to do that with various effects and processing. But you almost don't want to perceive the differences. So we're going to use very low mix amounts on these settings or timings. And that essentially boils down to something called the Haas effect. And there's tons of content out here breaking down what the Haas effect is and how it works. For the sake of this video, what you need to know about the Haas effect is that through the human ear and into the human brain, two identical sounds with a slight delay are perceived as one, meaning one sound. So if you had a click in your left ear and a click in your right ear and they were 30 seconds apart, you would definitely be able to discern which side they were coming from. Think of those, I don't know what an ear doctor is, or an audio doctor is called. That term eludes me. But when you go to do a hearing test, and you put the headphones on and they beep in each side and they have you raise your hand or select the side to confirm that your hearing is accurate. You can perceive those differences because of the delay in those sounds. But if we start getting a shorter delay between those sounds, eventually you can't perceive what side they're coming from. So I think, off the top of my head, I don't know if there's like a magic threshold. I know timing wise, typically we can't discern any differences under 10 milliseconds, maybe even like the 10 to 20 millisecond range, depending on the sound and the context. So just keep in mind that if two events happen close enough together, fast enough, one after the other, we don't actually perceive the difference. And we're going to try to create and replicate that with our side signals. So they're going to be different, but we want them to be so subtly different that they sound as one and together. So let's jump into the DAW. We are in Bitwig, and we are going to use my tune Werkzeug, which is a drum and bass tune. I don't know what subgenre you would call it. I don't think that really matters. But yeah, essentially, we're going to use a tune that I've already released and I kind of know the ins and outs of to enhance some of the sides and the stereo field. So just to get a clip of the original, and this might come in a little loud, so we're going to turn it down a bit. We'll take a listen. Also, there's going to be some bad words, so this is, I guess, not marked as for kids on YouTube.
So antisocial, I don't give a fuck if it's global. Limited space in my circle. How many times have I told you? So antisocial, I don't give a fuck if it's global. Limited space in my circle. How many times have I told you? Yo.
Okay, so there is some stereo width in there. You can see on this Vision 4X. Actually, I'll set this to side mode so we can only see the sides. And you can see we have some activity in here. A mono signal will just be like a vertical line, and a full side signal would be a horizontal line. When you kind of get this amorphous blob, it means that sounds are moving around and changing over time, which is more what we want. We don't want these perfect lines because it probably wouldn't end up sounding very good in the context of a tune. So I mixed and mastered this, and I kind of know what I brought to the table. But looking back, I think this song is like 2, maybe even 3 years old at this point. Learned a lot more in those years, and I think I could push this a little bit more in terms of side processing. So the first thing we're going to do is use some kind of a side or stereo bus. In this case, it's just the same. I'm using an effects send here, and I'm just sending the only track I have in this project to this effects send, which is the whole tune. I tend to work this way too in my live project file. So I'll have all these tracks and groups, and then I'll send selected things that I want to be expanded or excited to this dedicated stereo bus sometimes. The first thing that is important to note on here is we need to find a way to split the side and mid signals. It's going to vary from DAW to DAW. Bitwig has this nice feature, this nice plugin called mid side split, which does exactly that. And it creates a channel strip for the mids and the sides. In this case, I just have a utility on here turning the gain down for the mids. I don't need the mids to be present on this group because it's only going to address the sides. And then I have an EQ here with a high pass filter to remove the sub frequencies, because remember, we still want the low, like 100 hertz, maybe even 80 and below, to sit in that mono space. Yes, you can kind of get into stereo bass, and that's becoming more of a thing as technology improves on this stuff. But for certain things, like mastering for vinyl, for instance, that the bass or the sub low end really needs to be mono, because the grooves cut in the record are going to be pure anarchy, and the playback is going to be unpredictable. So we're cutting those bass frequencies out here, and now we just have the sides, or a side channel. So if I solo this, go to something with some like drums, and it's kind of faint. I could turn it up a bit. And you can see now we're getting that perfectly horizontal line because we're isolating the sides here. If I go to the stereo mode, which is going to use everything, you'll see more of a blob. Well, if I turn both on. Okay, so the first thing we can do on our stereo bus here is just utilize the Haas effect, right? So maybe we need to create a stereo signal from something that's mono. In this case, I'll just use this utility and I'll turn width to 0%, which makes it totally mono. So we now we check that we have a vertical line here. This is dead center. What we can do, solo our stereo bus again, is use, you could do this with delays, and I'm going to also get into that. Kilohertz just has a plugin called Os Effect, and it will just let you select either the left or the right channel and how much you want to delay it by. In this case, I'm doing a little over 1 millisecond, but let's hear that.
Yeah.
That's centered. That's delayed. And you could, there's no magic number of like, oh, 2.3 milliseconds is the perfect time for drum and I'm sure, if you really wanted to, you might be able to calculate out an ideal delay time, but I think it's better just to turn the knobs and just get something that sounds right to you and also looks right when you're metering. So we can do that. That's one way to create stereo signal. Some other ways that I like to create stereo excitement or side excitement is using various distortion or saturation plugins that have some kind of stereo linking or lack thereof effect on it. So in this case, we're using the kilohertz distortion. It's on saturation mode. I'm actually not using a lot of drive on it, about 2 dB of drive. And then I'm trying to preserve some of the dynamics because this is everything in here. So we're talking, drum transients and basses and cymbals and all that kind of stuff. Depending on what you're doing, you don't necessarily always need to preserve dynamics if it's not a dynamic sound. I need to. And we're using this spread parameter here, which we can see it allows the algorithm to affect the sides individually. Meaning, if you sum the signal up and then distort it, that will create one result. But if you let the distortion, or I guess in this case the saturation, happen on the left and right channels independently, it's going to create a different result. And we'll be able to hear that here. So if we'll turn it down, we'll play the same bit. I'll gradually turn it up.
Yeah.
And eventually when we get to 100%, now we're starting to get phase issues, essentially. And that's why the sound is kind of going away. So we use a really small amount to not, or to avoid getting those phase issues, but keeping that sound interesting independently.
Yeah.
And so there is a bit of gain being added to that, but we're also saturating it. And at some point, we'll probably end up turning a knob back down just to account for that, because something being louder doesn't necessarily always make it better. And that's why we need to gain match when we do these things. So you A, B, and then you make sure you account for the effect in the gain. So distortion is one way. Another way to excite two signals is simply just a delay. And this is basically the Haas effect, or a recreation of the Haas effect, not the plugin, the phenomena itself. But in this case, we're using a delay. It is a stereo delay. In this case, I'm doing a ping pong, and it's going to hit the left signal first and then the right signal. The feedback is all the way down. These blur options are just some like trail off characters in Bitwig to kind of emulate some different delay effects. We don't want any of that because we're just trying to have a clean signal here. I have the width dialed in. I don't necessarily need it to be 100% wide because it's going to be a little too prevalent. So I kind of pull that back down. And then the mix is only at 50 because we're working in like a group processing setting. I don't need only the feedback of the delay. I need the dry signal and the delayed signal as well. So let's take a listen to that.
Yeah.
So there's some differences there. And you can see as I turn this up, the Haas effect will begin to diminish. And you can hear these sounds kind of lagging and delaying.
Yeah.
Right, so now it's too muddy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for this particular tune, that 6.27 milliseconds kind of pleases my ears, and that's where I decided to keep that. The next thing we can do is simply add a chorus. Chorus just takes voicings and allows us to kind of use delays and feedbacks to create the same thing. In this case, I'm just using the Serum 2 chorus with Serum 2 effects. Any chorus can do it. This one has a particular sound that I just know and like. And I think it's pretty easy to use as well. So if we listen to this,
Yo. Try me.
right, we're getting some of that chorus width here. If I turn it all the way up, you'll definitely hear what's going on. And so what you're hearing there is the delayed signal left and right. Let's set it back to the original parameter. But once it's mixed in, we don't want to go past 50% because now we're kind of more in the wet territory than the dry territory. We're sort of using that to subtly create differences in the sides. Let's put our mid-side split back on too. Whoops, we're still working in mono, which just affects the routing here, so don't worry about that. Now you're really just hearing the sides. And so I would kind of consider those techniques to be the basics of stereo excitement. Distortion, delay, something like a chorus. I don't think all of these would sound good together, but let's see. It's not bad. And then I would always say, in reference, always check in context. I'm isolating these things just to show you the effects happening, but we need to hear them with everything.
Yo. Try me.
Okay. So those are some simple ways to create some excitement. Now I want to go over some more complex ways, not necessarily saying that they are complicated to do or complicated to understand. I just think they're a little bit more, the solution is more complex than simply adding an effect and turning on a knob. And I always use some combination of all of these. So I don't necessarily use every single effect and say that's the side bus, the stereo bus. I don't always just use one. So yeah, to start with the more complex solutions, you can use a dynamic EQ, something like a Pro Q, that allows you to affect bands dynamically, but also isolate the sides. So you could build this out in the DAW where you have like some kind of mid-side split and then an EQ on the side bands and then like an envelope follower or something. You don't have to do this in FabFilter. I just think it's pretty easy to do it right out of the bat. So we have this bell curve and it looks like we're adding about a dB of gain. Let's just take off the dynamic part. So if I just turn this up right now by isolating the sides, kind of addressing the almost like the harshness zone. It's like the high mids to the highs here. I'm adding about a dB of gain, but if I use this dynamic range thing, we can kind of affect the band based on the signal coming in. And you can see that band jumping now. So if we sum that up,
Yo.
it's almost like a high shelf. If you've ever seen, I know I've done it, but if you've ever seen someone throw a high shelf on here and use a dynamic EQ to have the high shelf jump at certain points, it kind of adds some brightness and some clarity to a sound. I'm using a bell just because I don't necessarily need everything from like 10K, 10 to 20K to be affected as well. That's just for the particular context of this tune. That's not to say I never need to address that. So dynamic EQ on the sideband is another way to kind of create some stereo excitement. A similar yet slightly different technique is to use a compressor and use upwards compression or expansion on the sideband. So we're not just turning a frequency range up, we are isolating a specific frequency range and affecting the dynamics of it. So in this case, I have this one band that's kind of going from the mids to the low mids to the highs. And I just have a threshold set and a range, and the attack release parameters on Pro MB are a little weird where they're percentages. Personally, I would prefer them to be in milliseconds or time based, but that's okay. Then we go over to this like special settings tab. We have stereo linking. We're not stereo linking as much. We're trying to affect each side differently a bit, and we're just working on the sides here. So again, we'll see something similar here, where this band will kind of jump dynamically on the signal.
Yo. Try me.
So same deal. And then just to show you that you don't necessarily need to use the exact plugin, I sort of rebuilt this with Bitwig stock plugins. In this case, we're doing a mid-side split. It's kind of the same as this mid-side split over here, so I'm just going to turn that off. We are removing the mids entirely, and on the sides, we're using a compressor. Actually, I'll leave this on just to, I'd always just move the EQ over here, but let's do that. It's too confusing if I don't do that. So we'll close this, and on this plugin, on this mid-side split, on the sides, we're going to use an EQ to cut the lows out, and a dynamics processor, which is compressor, to think about how to word this. So we're using the high threshold of this compressor traditionally to catch the peaks of a signal, and then we're using the low threshold of this compressor to actually make the quiet parts more quiet. Then we're going to turn everything up. We're kind of squashing the signal a bit and then using makeup gain to bring the volume back up and get it more in your face. So if we just listen to this, it's going to sound like this. See, it's very subtle and very faint, but it's kind of just allowing certain signals to come through. Let's turn off the EQ. Maybe we get more in there. It's kind of the same. And then you would adjust this output based on everything. So let's take a listen.
Yo. Try me.
So same deal. We're using a compressor, trying to get some dynamic excitement on specifically the sideband, and then we're mixing that back in to our sum signal in the master. Now, what we can also do, something that I really like doing as of lately, is using a ring modulator, and I'll use the signal of the main track as the modulator, and then the side channel or side group as the carrier. And essentially what we're going to do with this ring modulator is faster than milliseconds. We're getting into like the more like sample rate kind of stuff. We're going to have the signal duck out certain parts. So it's really only going to allow the sides to pop up and exist when they need to exist. If I isolate it, I'm not sure if it'll be audible. Let's take a listen. Okay, so it is. So it doesn't sound like much is going on there, but it's because this is happening so fast. I guess if you would slow this down a lot, maybe instead of input, we'll just use like a sine oscillator. I'll turn the frequency down really low and you'll hear the difference. You hear how there's kind of this crunchy sound. We've discussed ring mod and amplitude modulation in some other videos, but we're basically, instead of using a sine wave, which is just kind of easier to demonstrate what's happening here, we're using the signal of the whole tune. So this is obviously not a sine wave. It's a lot more complex than that. So that is kind of creating these peaks and troughs in the side signal now. That is allowing the sides to just exist in like these really minuscule moments. And then when we mix that in to our original signal, we get this like really tight and controlled side presence that I really like lately. We'll see if that changes over time. So if we listen to that, let me turn the gain up on this a bit, put this at like 10, and we're just going to turn this down and just mix it in.
Yo. Try me. Yo.
So that tends to be my go-to right now. And then some combination of these things. So maybe if I was to let's work from like bar 9, I might just turn on some of these and
So antisocial, I don't give a fuck if it's global. Limited space in my circle. How many times have I told you? I'm so antisocial, I don't give a fuck if it's global. Limited space in my circle. How many times have I told you? Yo. Try me. Yo.
yeah. So, if we take I think this little intro build up thing is a good place to test this out too, because it's supposed to kind of be this spacey sort of. You should feel like you're in the tune, not in front of it, listening to it or something. This would we'll take a listen with our side bus and our main track. That's without, and this is with.
So antisocial, I don't give a fuck if it's global. Limited space in my circle. How many times have I told you? I'm so antisocial, I don't give a fuck if it's global. Limited space in my circle. How many times have I told you? Yo. Try me.
So hopefully you can hear this. I didn't say this in the beginning, but I would certainly recommend you listen to this on headphones or speakers that are far enough apart to perceive left and right accurately. Which I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think your speakers or your monitors need to be at least 6 feet apart to truly hear stereo happening. So yeah, that's I should have prefaced this video with that. If you couldn't have heard anything happening the whole time, put some headphones in or something. I'm sure you'll hear the difference. Um, Again, this is something subtle, but I think it plays a big part in bringing a mix to life. I've heard some tunes from people, like good tunes from people that are very safe and mono, and they work, but they could be like 1 to 2% more interesting or better technically if they create some excitement in the sides. And that 1 to 2%, it might not seem like a lot, but if a track is like 98% finished, and then all of a sudden that 1 to 2% gets it to like 99 or 100%, and now you feel like you're in the track and not just in front listening to it, that can make or break a listener's experience. That could become someone's anthem because they just happen to be in the right place at the right time and they heard it the right way. So I hope these tips and tricks help you. Remember, the goal here is to create subtle differences in the left and right channels on the sides, and then mix those back into your full track on your master, and then you would go about your mastering or your final mix down mastering process, or send that off to the person that does that for you. I think for me, I tend to do it myself unless I'm working with a label or someone where they like want to have a specific mastering engineer or guy do it to keep sound consistent, or remove the bias of me, who I'm the guy that's been staring at the project the whole time, and so I start making decisions a certain way. For the most part, if you're working on stuff yourself, you should at least be able to master your music, and put out a demo and say, hey, this is like mixed and it's loud enough and it works on various systems. But I digress and I rant. Goal here: take the side channel, isolate the sides, send it to a channel, whether that's just a regular audio channel or an effects send track. Use various plugins to shape and sculpt and push the sides, typically independent of each other. I'm not saying that they have to be independent. You can do like one summed effect as well, but trying to create excitement. I tend to like things to happen independently. And then, you mix all these things in subtly, and you kind of just play around with them and hear what works, and more importantly, use what you like. Don't just use Ring Mod plugin because said it's good and you should use it, or I use it and therefore you should use it or something like that. Demo these things out and listen to them and make decisions for yourself. Often enough, I didn't decide that ring modulation sounds great on the sides. I've heard other people do that, and then I tested it out and I used it on some tracks that I've worked on, and I like the result. So now I'm going to stick with that result for the foreseeable future. So try these out, use these plugins, use other plugins. If you're not in Bitwig, I think one of the things I really hope this does is I hope this inspires you maybe to build some plugins or chains out in your particular DAW, which will then create a whole different flavor. And you might actually improve on something. You could say something about my dynamics processor here for the sides is lacking, and then you do something in Ableton that makes up for that, and it works out for your tunes. It's not about doing it my way. It's about finding a way that works best for you. So remember, spend some time, make the stereo field and the sides interesting and exciting. Mix that back into your regular project, and yeah, start getting wide signals. That being said, I think this will probably end up being my last video for the year. I'm going to take a short break, maybe about a week, either the last week of December or the first week of January to decompress. Hopefully, I will have some news for you in regards to releases and my individual production activities. I got some ideas for some other types of videos. They're not all going to just be tutorials or lectures like this. I want to maybe start getting into like some production philosophy and concepts, not just about music, but trying to have a healthy production, personal life balance, things that like will keep you active and be able to actually sit down and work on tunes and not drive yourself crazy and hate everything. So yeah, if I don't have another video out before the end of the year, I think there's two coming out. I'll be back in January. Happy holidays. If you have a holiday that you're celebrating, I hope everything is, exciting or mellow, depending on what you want to get out of that stuff. And good luck with your productions, and I'll see you in the new year.